Hey there, artists. This is Eben here, and during this week's video, I want to walk you through my process of doing a master study. Now, thanks to Nick Hiesel for requesting this in our Discord channel. You can check that out in the link below. We've just been chatting about art there for a few months, and it's been a lot of fun. But Nick requested this video. He wanted to know how I go about making a master study. So for this week's video, I thought I'd pick one of my favorite pieces from artist Tyler Edlin. And I'm also picking this because I'm actually going to be joining a chat on the Evident platform with Walid Fagali and Tyler Edlin this Friday at 1 p.m. EST. We're going to be just chatting with Tyler a little bit about composition and the top composition mistakes he sees in beginner artists. So I thought, considering that's a really awesome event we're going to be doing this week, I thought I would just go ahead and grab one of his pieces for today's master study. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to this channel if you want to check out videos like this every week, as well as catch live streams that I do on this channel every Sunday at 12 p.m. EST. Now, a master study is something that I recommend to all of my students or anyone who is trying to improve their artwork. The logic behind it is pretty simple. If you see a piece of artwork that you really like, that you wish you could create something similar to that, it really just makes sense to look at that artwork and then try to replicate it as best you can and try to capture its essence. Of course, you're never going to get it exactly the same, and I don't expect you to, and in fact, that's not the intent here. But this is a great way to learn from professional artists, from master artists, and to apply their wisdom to your own painting process. So this is actually a practice that I use at least once a week usually. It doesn't have to take more than 30 minutes or so, but you know, really just finding a great piece of artwork and then trying to replicate it, trying to understand it, and trying to learn from it. So that's what we're going to be diving into today, and we're going to try to keep it fairly brief because really most of the major elements of this painting can be plotted out in under 30 minutes, and we're not going to worry too much about all of these details just yet, because you know, really the most important things in a lot of great artwork comes down to strong values, strong composition, and a really nice harmonious color scheme. And if you get those three elements down, as well as basic shape language that's being communicated here, you can really capture most of the essence of a painting without needing to go into all those details and try to replicate all of that stuff. So let's just get going here. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm just going to set the tone of the canvas with a gradient. I'm kind of looking at just I'm sort of squinting my eyes and thinking about the general trend I see from the top of the canvas all the way down. So I'm seeing generally kind of this sort of dull light blue, moving down into maybe a more saturated blue, at least for a lot of those shadow colors, which I'm kind of going to be building off of as a base. So let's just set up that gradient like this. And the next thing I'm going to do, there are a lot of different ways you can approach this. I'm going to really try to keep this simple, and I'm going to stick to, you know, the major shapes of color and value I see here. So we can start off. I'm not going to create any different layers here as this develops. I'm going to kind of work from the background into the foreground a little bit here, but for the most part I'm just going to keep it all on one layer and keep it simple here, and try to think about the basic shapes I'm seeing. So one thing I'm kind of seeing right off the bat is, you know, sort of a basic kind of a triangular shape here that represents what we're seeing with the bottom of the clouds. I notice that's a little bit grayer relative to the sky color, so I'm just going to sort of shift that over to the gray to give it a little bit of warmth. And we're going to grab our let's grab our mixer brush here, and I can just go in there and start trying to I'm just going to sort of also, when I create these strokes, I'm going to follow the general trend that I'm seeing with the shape of these clouds. I'm seeing some darker values here. You know, I'm going to follow their form as much as I am creating value here as well. I'm creating some slight shifts too. I'm seeing a bit more violet here towards the center, and then a bit of almost a bit of redishness up here towards the top. It's not actually a pure red. It's actually more of a gray than anything, but it does look a bit red in that context. I'm just going to brighten up that value a little bit because I'm getting a little bit dark with it. And then we can go in, let's just reverse that selection just to keep things simple here. And we can grab, you know, that really nice, bright, warm cloud highlight color. And we can just sort of start to paint that in. Sometimes the mixer brush can have a little bit of difficulty, at least the way I've set it up, you know, grabbing that pure color. So we can switch over to something a bit more efficient in terms of putting down that really strong highlight color there. I'm just going to move this ever so slightly into the warmer range just to really show that the contrast between these areas. Maybe not too much. We might just keep it as sort of a pure gray, and that will actually allow us to maintain that warmth in the context of the blue that's being put down elsewhere. And of course we can't forget that pure sky color, so let's go ahead and make sure we include that really quickly. There's a nice shape here. I'm just going to sort of keep it simple with that shape and plot it out sort of as I see it, sort of a slanted rectangle there. And then there's another little bit up here. We can go ahead and remove that selection because obviously we're not gonna want to have that hard edge there. And I'm just gonna grab some more of those nice brighter values that we see up here. I'm going to start keying those in as well. I'm almost seeing a little bit of blue-green here in some of the shadow colors. So I'm going to get some of that in here as well. And I'm almost getting a bit too specific for what I want to be doing here. I really want to just be thinking about sort of general patterns here, so we're not going to sort of worry too much about all these cloud details at this point. Just want to get these basic shapes in here, and I'm kind of keeping a distant view of this of these shapes here and not zooming in at all. Just want to make sure these are all sort of working harmoniously together. I'm actually going to use my smudge tool, and I'm just going to set it to this brush type here, so we can go in and just sort of push around some of those values there. I'm seeing, I think, overall in the background there, those values are a bit lighter, so I'm going to grab a lighter color and use a large soft brush to just sort of smooth some of that out. And then way back there in the distance, we have a nice bright value going across our horizon line. We do have a horizontal, or not a horizontal, we have a diagonal horizon line here, which is, you know, is really giving this piece a lot of some really dramatic effects here. In terms of the perspective, it sort of creates a lot of motion here. I was actually just talking to a student in my mentorship program about this the other day, because they had this very flat foreground. It was just straight across the horizon line, and you know, we were sort of talking about how you can grab that horizon line and shift it a little bit, as just like we see in this image here, and that will create a bit more interest. It will create a bit more action and make it look a little bit more unbalanced, a little bit more unsettled, so it looks like something's about to happen there. I'm also just kind of trying to push the colors a little bit here, and just, you know, when I see something, that's just kind of a habit of mine. It's not something you necessarily have to do, but when I see a bit of a color in my reference, I just like to take it a little bit further and push it a little more in the direction that I see it there. So we have a nice bright, almost blue-green kind of highlight color here along the horizon, where that ambient light is sort of shining through. And then we can, there's a little spot of highlight too that we can get in there too before we move on. I'm not going to worry too much about all of those little smaller shapes there. I'm really mostly just concerned about these larger overall shapes and the colors in there. Once again, I think I'm just going to brighten up some of these values here. They looked a bit darker when I started out, but now I'm starting to see it's a little bit different there. And I think overall there's some more stuff in the blue-green range in these clouds than I initially depicted here. So I'm just going to kind of dial that up a little bit as well. Alright, I think that's good enough for now. We can always go in and edit some of those details later. Seeing there's this section back here, we have a repeated element, which is a really great feature of any composition. We have sort of this larger sort of circular structure here, and then we see another one off there in the distance, and that's really helping to tell a story here and illustrate the depth of this world, and also just to create visual depth in our painting. And we get to this nice sort of saturated, lighter, ambient blue-green down here by the in the distant ground there. And then of course we have our sort of main feature of the landscape. We have this really nice, interesting shape here. I think overall it's kind of spherical. I think we could easily represent it with a simple sphere, or perhaps, you know, kind of a sphere with a pointed top there. So let's just see if we can simplify things for ourselves and give it this sort of flattened sphere look. We can just go in there with a large textured brush, like I really like to do, and just to make sure it has a little bit of texture variety. We don't want to just fill it with a solid color, because that's not going to really help us get anywhere. There's some nice violets happening here as well. That's pretty much it. Of course, it's a simplification of the whole thing, so we can kind of go in and we'll map out that triangle at the top and sort of show where that's coming into the clouds. Tyler has sort of cleverly reduced the contrast at the top there, so our eye isn't tempted to go up off the edge of the page there, and it's also allowing there to be more of a focus on this brightly lit greener area down there at the bottom. And of course there are these little cutouts on the side, so we can just sort of start to fudge the shape a little bit. No need to get too far into that. And then down here, I'm seeing a similar color range as we were seeing in the distant area there, but it's a bit darker and a bit more saturated. So we can just start to cue that in down here. That's creating a lot of nice atmospheric depth. Actually going to push it a little bit more towards the blue, a little bit less cyan, because I'm seeing some of that down there, which is really nice. Notice that all of these shadow areas just have a really strong color to them. They're not just a darker version of the color we see in the lighted areas. They're very deliberately sort of colored to illustrate depth in the environment. Okay, and then next there's some of these as we kind of come into the foreground. Actually, before we do that, there's another example of that repeated element up there, and I know for a fact from watching his content that Tyler's very conscious of the shape choices he uses and the shape language here, and you know, we can see some really clear, simple shape language that's very readable, very well articulated here, with these kind of spherical objects. So I'm just going to sort of tap in some of that. I'm actually seeing an opportunity there. I just want to try this real quickly, even though this is a bit of a detail thing here. I just want to give this a whirl because I'm seeing an opportunity to use this brush that I created to match what's going on up there with those with these this surface here. So just real quickly, I'm gonna dab those in because it's kind of funny how they matched up like that. But I'm not gonna really go into it much further than that. Probably I will grab my digital brush again, and I think there's just a bit more of a dark blue tinge here, especially towards the bottom where all that atmosphere is collecting. And then we can grab, you know, our thin, let's use our thin dry brush here, which can be really nice for creating details like this, thin objects. Just gonna really quickly sort of plot some of this stuff out. There's a nice negative shape in there too, so we can actually plot these out based on that. I don't know if you can see what I'm talking about there, right between these branches. It's a really nice shape. Once again, I know that Tyler is making all of these choices deliberately. He's a good understanding of strong shapes, so I'm going to trust in that and just follow along that way. Okay. And down towards the bottom here, I'm actually going to use the wand tool to quickly select that. We have sort of transition into a bit more of a green here. More of a yellow-green actually, so we can actually transition from the gray a little bit lighter there into that range. I think it's just still a bit too saturated. There's a little bit of that up here as well. We don't want to make anything over here too saturated because it is pretty close to the corner, and we just don't want to draw the eye off the edge of the canvas there. Likewise, we can see that Tyler hasn't created too much high contrast over here in this section, because that would draw attention away from these nice figures in the foreground. Alright, let's keep moving on. I think we have some mountains here in the background. We can kind of loosely... I'm making some really lazy shapes here, so don't... I'm just doing this really quickly. Of course, they're not totally accurate, but I think they're actually just a little bit more in the violet range. Just a bit. I'm just going in there just to create some quick silhouettes. And of course, at this point, I do want to sort of step back and, you lean back or zoom out and make sure, these are approximately shaping up. It's a little bit hard to see until we get all of those major shapes in, so let's just continue doing that here. Okay, and the next real major shape I'm seeing here is this great one, and it's good to note where it starts at the edge of the canvas as well. So I'm seeing it start around the 30% line there. And then we have, let me just try that again. We can actually tap in that shape later, so I'm not going to worry about that. It's not a huge feature of this object. And I'm just going to kind of follow with some general lines here. I'm not worried about making these sort of, straight digital lines. Like I said, we can always go in later and sort of, smooth these out a little bit. But I just want to make sure I capture the negative space and the essence of this shape here. And then I'm seeing it come up. I actually have made it a little bit too low, but we can go in and fix that later. And then around I think the 70% mark down here at the bottom of the canvas, the shape comes back in. Boom, boom, boom. I think I've even made it a little bit too complex, so we'll see how this looks. There's a little shape down there. Okay. Now let's grab that nice darker, sort of muted green. There's a lot of color variety here that we can sort of put in there later, but overall I'm seeing a bit of a dark, dull yellow-green in the shadows here. And then as it transitions into the light, that color sort of gradually fades out and is replaced by a bit of a lighter shadow color. And then in the sunlit sections, transition into a warmer, probably a bit duller yellow-green here. I'm actually going to switch my brush here. Just something that will sort of fit the texture a little bit more. Because while we have this selection, we might as well use that as an opportunity to create a little bit more nice texture around here. So that's what we're going to do. Having these brush strokes follow the contour of the objects themselves as well. So it's kind of a shorthand, you know, it's almost like I'm taking notes about this. I'm not writing the whole essay here, I'm just sort of mapping out the major changes we see here, starting with those big shapes. Of course, if you want to, you can always go back in later and get a bit more specific, but we're really going to save ourselves a lot of work as we would with any painting, just by starting out with these big sort of general trends we see. And I'm seeing a bit of some darker kind of blue-greens down here. And then I think we can safely go ahead in and remove that selection now. Of course it looks a little bit rough, but we're getting close, you know. And next I'm just going to make sure I have this big foreground shape in correctly, because that's really important here. And in terms of how it occupies the whole canvas space. I think I actually might want to just bring it up a little bit. Don't want to get too complicated here. I think it's just basically two major line changes there. And then let's take this area here. You can try a different type of textured brush. Doesn't matter so much. I'm just going to sort of tap that in there. Maybe increase the saturation. Maybe give it a little bit of variety. Maybe tap into the yellows a little bit, just as a baseline. And then we can grab our mixer brush and start to sort of, you know, evaluate where we want to make some slight changes here and there, or smooth out any shapes. I'm seeing some nice red oranges down here. We can throw in to sort of nicely contrast the green we're seeing in there. Looks like a trend that sort of follows all the way along this sort of vine thing. And then here in the foreground, I'm seeing some nice sort of darker blue-greens around in this sort of misty area down here. And then beyond that, we can actually see some brighter light blue values sort of in the gaps between this structure here. And then I'm seeing a lot of this kind of fade into that ambient, sort of ambient atmospheric haze back here. There's not really that much contrast between the green object and the bluish atmosphere that it occupies, but there are some stronger green here, some stronger greens here where the sunlight is hitting, so I want to make sure I capture that as well. And then a little bit of highlights here along the top of the path, and we can see that sort of starting to lead into these really nice, interesting spots along the structure, which I'm seeing as just a couple, quick brush strokes right now, so I'm just gonna key those in really quick. This is actually a very important area. There's a lot of it's distant, so it's hard to pick up on, but it's actually a pretty high contrast, high saturation area relative to other objects in that area, so we want to make sure we sort of dial that up a little bit to match, because that's kind of our distant focal point. And then while we're here, we can just make some slight adjustments to the shape, create some nice patterns that follow the form of this object. It kind of curves around like this. But that's about all the detail I want to go into at this point. Okay, let's keep moving along here. Actually, just seeing a little spot here where we can create a bit more of a shadow tone here. Alright, let's move on to our foreground. And of course the most important feature in this painting, or at least one of them, which is these characters here. And there's a really nice sense of motion happening here, and a lot of that is sort of articulated by the shape language we see. So I'm actually going to map this out based on what I see in the negative space around it, especially as it pertains to that big spherical structure behind. So I'm really just, when I'm plotting out this shape, I am paying attention to those negative spaces, as I would when doing any kind of study or trying to replicate anything that I see. It's just as important to pay attention to those negative spaces as much as the positive. Just going to keep it pretty simple, and let's just grab something that generally approximates that local color. I actually am going to throw this on a new layer just because I may want to make some adjustments to the area behind it before we wrap this up here. And I'm going to grab sort of a lighter value to use for some of those areas that are facing upward. Actually, some of this, on the upper plane of a lot of these objects, they're actually picking up a lot of the ambient sky color, so they're going to be a little bit cooler. Whereas where the light is hitting directly, for example, on the back of this creature here, it's going to be more of a warm, bright, direct light. So I'm going to just kind of play between those a little bit here. And we can probably safely deselect, and then let's just grab that nice warm highlight color here and just make some quick strokes to show where that lighting is hitting. And then we can sort of erase away some of these other smaller negative shapes here. No need to be too precise at this point. And then I'm actually going to select that layer, and let's just kind of quickly throw in some of these nice dark shadow tones here. Some really awesome creature design here. So actually, within this creature, there's some real depth happening. There's a little bit of reflected light on the underside of this object here, a little bit back here, and under the figure. And then actually in these legs behind it, you can see the sort of it's almost atmospheric depth on a small scale. It's just a little bit of dust being kicked up, which really helps to show the depth between these different limbs here. And then we have this really nice saturated blue, which is helping to solidify this as our focal area. A nice sort of highlight touch right there where it faces the sky. Once again, I'm not trying to get too detailed here. I just want to make sure all that stuff is generally there. Let's sort of just modify this shape a little bit here because that's pretty important. And then we just want to check, make sure our overall values are sort of coming together well. I'm seeing just a bit darker overall here towards this area that's not so much in the light. I suppose if we want to, we can include these little orange shapes here, but it's not essential at the moment. All right, I think overall maybe we can just sort of solidify this as a silhouette a little better before we move on to these other figures here. So I'm just going to kind of darken some of this, make sure it reads clearly from a distance. And there's some highlights in there that we can throw in just because this is a really important area in the painting. We can take some of those highlights and really make this stand out a bit. Notice those highlights are positioned in such a way that they're always going to be brighter than the background right behind them. Even if those cloud highlights compare to that level of value, they're not superimposed over one another. And actually I'm seeing just a little bit of nice reflected light here along the bottom. So I'm going to just warm this up a little bit. Maybe we can do this leg a little bit more justice too by by giving it some nuance here. All right. Let's just quickly tap in some of these other figures here. Once again, we don't have to overcomplicate things. Let's just get these major shapes here. Now you can, by the way, you can do this without using the lasso tool. This isn't totally necessary. I like to use this because it forces me to make limited shape choices. And it sort of forces me to think more broadly about the kinds of shape decisions I want to make, and sort of making those a little bit more concisely. You can of course just do this by painting out all the brush strokes. It's totally up to you how you want to proceed with this, but this is just generally how I prefer to do it, at least at first, especially because as I often say, it's a little bit easier to sort of fudge out and lose edges as you move forward than perhaps it is to create them. So if we start with a really solid kind of edge here, we can easily go in later and sort of cut that out and sort of smooth that out. And I'm just kind of squinting my eyes a little bit here and making sure that they're sort of generally looking close to one another. I'm actually going to throw in some darker values that I see here just because that's really important for the readability of this object here. But overall, I think we've got it mostly right. And then let's just throw in this other character down here. Can simplify this even more, give it kind of a rectangle here, and then here's our rider and the head. I'm just gonna pick one of the colors from our foreground here. We can just kind of tap some of this in. It's going to be our shadow values are going to be a little bit lighter than they are in the foreground, just because of the distance here. We want to include some of that atmosphere as well, and then a little bit of those really great bluish decals here. It's going to be a little bit less saturated, but we're still going to see that, and that's just really a nice way to indicate that this is a important object. We can even grab that same highlight color because there is a bit of direct light happening here. And then there's just some nice sort of hazy atmosphere going on where all this dust is being kicked up right below these figures. So I kind of want to we can grab this object here and invert that selection. And then in this layer above it, we can just kind of play up some of that haze to really show the distinction between these two areas. We can do that a little bit here on this foreground figure as well, just in these these feet right at the base. And then we don't want to forget to shape this foreground to give it that same depth here. Some really nice sort of darker, duller kind of reds happening here down at the bottom. They're a little bit cooler than I've started here, so I'm going to keep pushing that a little bit more towards the violet and towards the gray. Just a little bit darker. You know, sometimes you just have to keep making these little small color adjustments as you work to make sure you're putting down these things accurately. And then there's a bit of a nice green happening here. Some sort of curvy details with a more saturated green around here. You can see a little bit of a highlight hitting the edge of the grass here, so we can grab that color and grab our comb brush. Just kind of go in and show some of that. Actually, this color, this edge is just going to keep coming down here like that. We don't really see any of those shadow values in that area. And of course, we just have some nice little bits of saturated yellows here and there in the grass here. Just a nice effect. So you can really lose yourself in these master studies because you know, you just keep finding new details that you missed during the first pass, so you can just easily kind of gravitate from one section to the next and sort of keep discovering new things that you can add and develop. And you can really do that for as long as you want. If you really want to get it to a point where you have a lot of those same details, and you know, where you're really sort of trying to get at least a little bit closer to the level of detail that you see in your reference, you know, you're obviously welcome to do that. I find that as that process kind of continues, you get a little bit of diminished returns in terms of how well you understand the piece. I'm actually just going to merge all of these layers down. You know, I think a lot of the most important elements of your study are going to happen during this first kind of phase where you're really just mapping out these general things, and that's also where a lot of your mistakes can happen as well. So if you kind of miss some things during this phase, it's going to be it's going to be a little more detrimental to your study than if you sort of mess up some small details here and there. So this stuff is really fundamental to the whole thing. So you really want to make sure that you spend some time at this scale checking out these overall shapes and really sort of you know, really making sure you understand all of these overall values and composition structure. Alright, let's make sure we don't forget this nice little shape here. You know, as I'm doing this, I'm definitely feeling like this this inclination to keep going and to keep trying to develop this further and replicate some things. You know, I don't think that it's necessarily necessary, as I said, in terms of being able to learn from a master study, but it can be quite fun, and by the end you can make something that maybe you thought you weren't capable of creating at your skill level, and that's a great sign. That's just a sign that you are learning, and that you picked a good subject. So real quickly, I just want to sketch in some last kind of textural details around this focal area, because it's sort of important to include those. Just as in with any painting, you want to just spend a little bit more time getting those details into your major focal points than you would sort of elsewhere. There's a lot of details in this landscape back here that we can kind of throw in real quickly, but in terms of the overall composition, I think we've kind of tackled most of the major elements here. So I think I just want to, before we wrap this up, I just want to kind of go in and create just a subtle silhouette of what we're seeing here with this distant object. Once again, it doesn't have to be exactly right, but do pay attention to the shapes and the shape language that is being used. Obviously, if you are attempting to replicate a painting from a really skilled artist such as Tyler here, you owe it to yourself to pay attention to the choices they've made in terms of the presentation of their shapes, the quality of their lines and their brush strokes and all of that stuff, because they are doing it deliberately. Even if it looks effortless or accidental, there are deliberate choices being made there. And I'm just going to go ahead and reverse that selection and sort of just solidify that shape. There's just some nice fogginess down here that I want to get in as well. Some really nice atmosphere overall in this piece. And if you know anything about me, you know that I love some solid atmosphere and some clouds and all that. I just really get a kick out of all that stuff. Losing edges and so forth. We can do that with some of these shapes we created to make them look a little bit less artificial here. I think I just want to quickly modify some of these cloud shapes as well. Give them a little bit more spunk here. Okay, I think that's gonna do it for this one. Of course, like I said, there's a lot more detail in here, a lot more nuance in terms of the overall shape language, the values, the composition, and so forth. But if we kind of look between these two, let's sort of flip to see how well I've done here, because I haven't really been doing that throughout this process. We have roughly the general composition here. We have all of our major key elements sort of plotted out, and of course at this point we're free to kind of go in and continue to try to replicate and imitate some of these details, maybe make some adjustments to some of the values and color choices we've used here. But overall, I've learned quite a bit just from doing this today, and it hasn't taken me too long. I think we're looking at about 45 minutes for this study here. So I encourage you to find an artist that you would like to emulate, whose work you admire, that you would like to replicate in your own work, and take some time to sit down, do a quick study of their work. It doesn't have to take all day. You can just do it once a week, and I can guarantee that's going to improve your skills quite a bit. So thank you all for watching, and please go ahead and check out that live event this Friday. I'm going to include a link to that in the description below. That's Friday, March 26th at 1 p.m. I'm going to be chatting with Tyler with Walid Fagali on the Evident platform, and it's going to be a great conversation, so make sure you check that out. And of course, please make sure you check out Tyler's YouTube channel. There's a lot of really awesome content and tutorials. He's a great artist and a great teacher. I highly recommend you check that out. And Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the channel and make sure you keep an eye out for my live streams on weekends at 12 p.m. EST on Sundays, as well as videos I release on this channel every Wednesday. Alright, happy painting guys, and I'll see you next time.